To conclude, I would like to draw the attention to a number of critiques that have been voiced against rational choice theory, sometimes with the intention to reform it, sometimes also as an outright rejection of it, mostly within sociology. And the critique can be occurring at different levels. So we saw that rational choice makes many assumptions, both for the explanatory level, the normative level, the ontological level, and on all of these levels, it can potentially be criticized. What is a little bit difficult for critiques is that the status of rational choice models is not perfectly clear. So in one reading, rational choice is just a heuristic, that sort of a tool that better understands a reality in only economic contexts, potentially in other contexts as well. And in that, let's say, minimal reading, rational choice theory, even as part of the Weberian package in sociology, and Weber's understanding of rational choice is probably just that, that in certain contexts, the assumption that actors act rationally and pursue their self-interest is a very good tool, a heuristic, that enhances our understanding of the motives and is perhaps also a good blueprint against which to judge deviations from that model of action. In a more, let's say, demanding reading of rational choice, it is meant to be a full-fledged descriptive model that has the ambition to adequately represent decision-making, real decision-making in societies. And against sort of this background, then rational choice can be criticized for it being inadequate when depicting reality, because real world actors do not behave as in the ideal model world of rational choice. A frequent answer to that kind of critique by rational choices then is that it is just a model. It is just meant to simplify, and perhaps it's just meant as a normative construct in order to tell actors what actually the most rational choice should be. So in a way, rational choice can also evade this reproach that it is not a good representation of real decision-making by simply shifting the interpretation of models to them being normative. The normative critique against rational choice models is obviously based on, let's say, more altruistic understandings of society and the impression that a society based on rational self-interest alone is too unstable, so that the Smithsonian dream of a liberal market utopia may not be true. So these are just a couple of general problems that critics of rational choice face. And here I present a couple of standard critiques that exist. So one that is rather headed towards a reform of rational choice is a critique coming from behavioral economists, namely Kahneman and Tversky, who also won the Nobel Prize of Economics for their work. That is, they undertake psychological experimental work on real decision-making. And one of the main findings, which Daniel Kahneman here summarized in this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is that real-world actors obviously are not perfectly informed, are not perfect calculating machines, but that they are not hyper-rational and rather use satisficing strategies. That is sort of rule of thumbs, just heuristics that make their lives easier, so that they don't have to calculate most of the time. And heuristics which also come with certain biases, making real-world actors less rational than the models would predict. And yeah, this is a fun read, this book, and I mentioned just a couple of, let's say, biases that Kahneman and Tversky found in their experimental work. So in general, they find a tendency towards cognitive laziness. So many of the biases can be reduced to us not thinking enough, switching into a mode of routine, and therefore being subject to potential biases. Here on the right-hand side, you probably all have seen this yourself, the so-called anchoring effect. That is, we are influenced by sort of the presentation of objects here, this mark, depending on the context in which it is shown. So if there is a number attached to this mark as sort of the anchor here, then sort of despite the two marks costing the same here, this additional number anchor makes us rather go for the second mark here, even though a rational actor would simply go by the very same information of them representing now the value of $300. And that comparison should not be influential, but in experiments it actually is. Another example are priming effects. So here is an experimental setup where sort of subjects are primed with either an image of flowers in 1 week, or in another week here, an image of more or less dangerously looking eyes. And the dependent variable here is how much money these subjects put into sort of a common coffee fund that is situated, or a milk fund, sorry, that's situated next to the coffee machine, where, as you can see here, more sort of money is spent for this collective good in cases where the eyes are shown when compared here with the flower images as a priming stimulus. So again, the rational choice actor would probably not be influenced, but the real decision makers in the world are influenced by these kind of priming effects, which here, yes, represent something like the influence that potential sanctions might have. So as an upshot of this, then real world actors are just satisficers. They are subject to what the authors also call bounded rationalities. That is also a kind of rationality that draws on heuristics, that uses also institutions as sort of important background conditions that enable a satisfying kind of mode of rationality. And it is also a kind of rationality that is dependent on the different contexts. So one of the rational choice theorists, yes, who offers in a way a kind of compromise between the rational choice understanding of action and the more cultural habit mode of action, or yeah, you could also replace this with the perhaps phenomenological model of action we learned about, is Hartmut Esser with his work, yes, on the context dependency of our mode of decision-making, where there are certain situations in which we switch on our calculative mode, right? When we are in an economic context, we are confronted with a job offer that offers a salary, then obviously we switch on our calculative mode because this is a high cost decision. Whereas when we are primed with certain advertisements or the position of the yogurts on the supermarket shelf, then we are rather subject also to irrational decision making, but not necessarily because we are irrational, but because we are rationally switching on our routine mode of action, and we are switching on our sort of cultural habit mode. And this decision may be conscious, or it could even be subconsciously happening. And this is somehow, if you want, a compromise between the rational choice world, which has perhaps certain points in very economic contexts, and the more phenomenological understanding also of cultural habits, routines, and rules of appropriateness, ruling the more routine